$487. That is the total amount James Whitfield spent to build a fully insulated cabin with cedar trim, glass doors, and a wooden deck in rural Tennessee on private land where not one neighbor, inspector, or city official has filed a complaint in 2 years. Whitfield is 41 years old. He had been a sheet metal fabricator earning $18 an hour outside Knoxville, paying $975 in monthly rent, until his landlord raised the bill and gave him 60 days. He did not find another apartment. He did not go to a shelter. He drove 80 miles south to a military surplus yard, paid $300 for a corrugated steel arch, and built himself a home. This is how he did it. And the reason men across 6 states are doing the same thing, without permits, without complaints, is the part most people never hear. To understand what Whitfield did and why thousands of other men are now doing the same thing, you need to understand how completely the American housing market has stopped working for anyone earning a wage instead of salary. In 2024, the median sale price of a home in the United States reached $412,000, according to data from the National Association of Realtors. That is up from $274,000 in 2019. In 5 years, the median home price rose by more than $138,000. Median household income over that same period rose by approximately $8,000. The math does not require a calculator. According to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies, a household needs to earn at least $110,000 a year to afford a median-priced home without exceeding 30% of income on housing costs. The median household income in 2023 was $80,610. That gap, $29,000 wide, has widened every year since 2020. Renting has not been a refuge. The average asking rent for a one-bedroom apartment crossed $1,500 a month in 2023 for the first time in recorded history, according to Apartment List. In Tennessee, a worker earning $18 an hour would need to work 62 hours a week just to keep rent below that threshold. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition estimated in 2024 that the United States is short 7.3 million affordable rental homes for its lowest-income renters, not units that cost too much, units that simply do not exist. And while legislators have debated billion-dollar programs and decade-long construction timelines, something different has been happening in rural counties across the country. What that looks like, and why it generates zero complaints, is what this story is about. Whitfield had not been looking for a way out of conventional housing. Before the fall of 2022, he had been a sheet metal fabricator at a manufacturing plant outside Knoxville for 9 years. He knew the equipment, the supervisors, the rhythm of the place. He paid $975 a month in rent and kept a savings account that felt, if not comfortable, at least stable. Then the plant restructured. His hourly rate dropped from $22 to $18. 3 months later came the landlord's notice. Rent was rising to $1,175, effective in 60 days. He ran the numbers once. Then he stopped running them. What he decided to build was not a new idea. The United States Navy had already proven it worked. In 1941, on Pacific Islands, with unskilled labor, no foundation, and nothing heavier than a socket wrench. A Quonset hut is a half-cylinder of corrugated steel, flat base, bolt-together arch ribs, corrugated panels that attach with self-tapping screws. The Navy invented them at Quonset Point, Rhode Island, because they needed shelters that could ship flat and go up in 4 hours anywhere in the Pacific. By the end of World War II, roughly 150,000 had been built and deployed. After the war, they spread to farms and ranches across the country, barns in Iowa, workshops in rural Texas, storage buildings from Montana to Mississippi. They still cycle through military surplus auctions by the thousands. A clean unit sells for $2,000 to $5,000. A dented or surface-rusted unit sells for far less, because commercial buyers walk past cosmetic imperfection. That gap, the difference between a unit a contractor wants and a unit a contractor leaves behind, was exactly the opening Whitfield needed. He did not have a blueprint. He did not have a contractor. He had a socket wrench set, a library card, and a church contact who drove a flatbed for a logging company on weekdays. He did not own land. He was not going to buy any. Rural land in Anderson County Tennessee, ran between $3,000 and $8,000 an acre for anything with road access, and his entire bill budget was under $500. So Whitfield did what the math required. He drove the county roads and knocked on doors. The first man said no before Whitfield finished his sentence. The second said he would think about it, which in rural Tennessee means no without the discomfort of saying it out loud. The fourth door belonged to a retired mail carrier named Gerald Pruitt. Pruitt owned 6 acres along a gravel road outside Norris that had not been cleared or maintained in years. Brush had taken over most of the property. His knees made the upkeep impossible. His 2 sons lived in Georgia. Whitfield offered a trade. He would clear the brush, maintain the fence line along the road, and check on Pruitt's house during the winter months when the pipes were at risk. In return, Pruitt would let him place a structure on the back 2 acres, out of sight from the road, with access to the barn's outdoor spigot. Pruitt said yes. No lease, no contract, a handshake between 2 men who had something the other needed. You probably think the permit question came next. It came first. Before Whitfield bought a single bolt, he drove to the Anderson County Public Library and spent 2 hours at Public Computer researching zoning thresholds. Rural Tennessee code in unincorporated areas exempt structures under 200 square feet from building permits, provided they are not connected to municipal utilities. A standard 20-foot Quonset arch has a footprint of roughly 168 square feet. That calculation was not accidental. The unit came from a surplus yard outside Chattanooga. 2 dented roof panels, rust along the base flanges, door frames slightly out of square, priced at $300. The steel arches were solid, the bolt holes aligned. He paid cash. Getting it 90 miles north required a flatbed. A rental would have cost $200 before fuel. Marcus Webb, a man from Whitfield's church who drove a flatbed for a timber company, agreed to haul it on a Saturday the truck sat idle. Whitfield paid him $35 in gas money. The arch panels arrived on a Saturday morning in March of 2023, lowered onto red Tennessee clay by the truck's hydraulic arm. 3 weekends later, a structure was standing in Gerald Pruitt's backfield. What happened inside those 3 weekends is the reason it works. The Quonset design is built for speed. Curved steel ribs bolt together in sequence. Corrugated panels attach with self-tapping screws. Assembly took Whitfield 3 weekends working alone, with 1 near failure that almost ended the project on the first afternoon. Each arch rib weighs roughly 40 pounds and must be held overhead while being bolted to the adjacent section. On the first attempt, a rib slipped and hit him across the left shoulder hard enough to leave a bruise that lasted 2 weeks. He sat in the clay, looked at the steel pile, and thought about it. Then he went to Pruitt's barn, found 2 2x4s and a length of rope, and rigged a simple A-frame hoist that let him raise each remaining rib into position without bearing the full weight. He bolted every subsequent arch from a stepladder he found leaning against the barn wall. The end walls required custom work. Plywood and 2x4 lumber from a hardware store in Norris for $82. The front wall got a door from the Habitat for Humanity restored in Knoxville for $18, and 1 window salvaged from a house demolition on the east side of town. Insulation was a problem, separating a livable cabin from a metal oven. An uninsulated corrugated steel arch in a Tennessee July reaches 140 degrees inside by noon. In January, the same steel radiates cold inward and creates condensation that drips from every surface. Whitfield attacked it from the outside first. 2 rolls of foil-face radiant barrier, $45 total, wrapped along the arch exterior and secured with adhesive and wire ties. That single reflective layer bounces solar radiation before it ever reaches the steel. Peak interior temperature dropped by more than 20 degrees. For the interior, he visited 2 active construction sites outside Norris and asked the foreman for rigid foam board cutoffs from the waste bins. Both said yes. Over 3 weeks, he collected enough to line the entire interior curve, cutting each panel with a utility knife and gluing it to the arch with construction adhesive. Then the vapor barrier, a 50-foot roll of 6mm plastic sheeting, $22 at a hardware store, stapled to the interior framing before the foam went up. Warm air hitting cold steel creates condensation. The vapor barrier stops entirely, $22. for years later. Zero mold. Water came from the roof. Aluminum gutters feeding two 55-gallon food-grade drums on cinder blocks. Source-free from a Knoxville food processing plant that was discarding them. 8 drops of unscented bleach per gallon. Annual purification cost, approximately $5. Solar power came from 3 damaged panels collected free from an insulation company in Oak Ridge that gave them away because disposal cost money. 2 salvage yard car batteries at $20 each. A charge controller ordered online for $35. The system powers 4 LED strips, a USB charging station, a 12-volt fan, and a radio. Cooking ran on a 2-burner propane camp stove on a plywood counter along the front wall. A 20-pound tank lasts 6 weeks. $18 to refill. Annual fuel cost, approximately $130. Total bill cost, every material, every hardware item, every gallon of transport fuel, tracked across 3 months of work, $487. The first night, Whitfield lit the LED strip and cooked a meal at the palletwood table. The Labrador crossed the threshold, circled once, and lay down on the deck. Whitfield locked the door from the inside. That was not a small thing. Here is what the numbers look like when you put them next to each other. $487. Total build cost. 1 man, 1 cabin, still standing in Anderson County, Tennessee, more than 2 years after the last bolt was tightened. $531,000. Average cost per unit of permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles, according to a 2024 report from the City Controller's Office. The math is not subtle. You have probably heard that American cities have a homelessness crisis. You have probably heard that billions are being spent to address it. What the spending figures do not explain is why a sheet metal worker in rural Tennessee spent $487 and produced a better outcome than programs that cost 1,000 times as much. The city of Los Angeles spent approximately $300 million on its Inside Safe Homelessness initiative. According to the city's own data, roughly 40% of the people placed into housing through that program ended up back on the streets. $300 million. Nearly half back where they started. Whitfield has not been back on the streets. Neither has his dog. The phrase zero complaints is not a slogan. It is a product of decisions made before a single bolt was tightened. The structure sits on private land with the property owner's knowledge and verbal permission. It is not connected to municipal water or sewer. Under Anderson County zoning code in unincorporated areas, that combination places the structure entirely outside the permit requirement. There is no violation on record. There is no inspector with jurisdiction. The legal position is not a loophole. It is a result of careful research done at a public library computer before $1 was spent. This approach works in rural counties for reasons that do not transfer to cities. Available land with owners willing to trade maintenance for access. Relax enforcement in unincorporated areas. Surplus material streams, construction waste, solar panels, food-grade drums that generate free building components. And communities where a neighbor is more likely to offer a socket wrench than file a zoning complaint. In urban environments, every one of those conditions reverses, which is why the men building these cabins are doing so quietly on rural land, in counties where the cost of enforcement and the cost of land are both close to zero. What the finished cabin gave Whitfield was not glamorous. There was no running water. There was no bathroom with a door. There was a propane stove, an LED strip, a palletwood table, and 168 square feet of insulated steel with a front door that belonged to him. That was enough. Gerald Pruitt came out to see it on a Saturday afternoon in late April. He walked around the exterior once, looked at the cedar trim Whitfield had fitted around the glass door frame, and said it looked better than anything that had gone up on that land in 40 years. He did not make a speech about it. He shook Whitfield's hand and walked back to his truck. A man named Dennis Hartley, who did finished carpentry on weekends, heard about the project through church and drove out one Sunday with a box of cedar trim pieces left over from a job in Oak Ridge. He would not take anything for them. He said cedar weathers well against corrugated steel and told Whitfield to call if he needed help with the door frame alignment. That trim is visible in every photograph of the cabin. Glass doors sit inside cedar framing against dark corrugated steel. It does not look like a temporary structure. It looks like a cabin. Whitfield said later that the first thing he noticed when he woke up that first morning was a silence. No parking lot sounds. No engine noise. No other people moving around him in the dark. He had not slept through the night in 4 months. When he opened the door, the Labrador was already on the deck. The dog looked up once, set his head back down on the cedar boards, and watched the field. The corrugated steel caught the early light across its corrugations. The tree line sat quiet at the far end of Pruitt's property. A locked door, a quiet field, a dog on the deck. Whitfield said that was the whole point. All of it, right there. Whitfield's cabin in Anderson County is not the only one. Social workers and county outreach personnel across the rural South and Midwest have documented more than 40 similar builds on private land since 2021. Men who arrive at the same surplus arch structure, the same insulation sourcing method, and the same county code threshold research without ever having met one another. In Benton County, Arkansas, a 58-year-old retired pipefitter named Harold Stokes built a 168-square-foot Quonset cabin on the back corner of a neighbor's and used farmland after his fixed income made apartment rental impossible. Total build cost, $510. He has been living in it for 2 years. His neighbor drops eggs from the chicken coop on the porch railing twice a week and does not knock. In Navarro County, Texas, a 29-year-old former Army infantryman named Derek Okafor built a cabin from a surplus arch he found at a military liquidation auction in Waco for $340. Okafor had served 2 tours overseas and come home to a rental market that had doubled since he enlisted. He learned the vapor barrier technique from a YouTube series watched at the public library in Corsicana, drawing the diagrams on notebook paper and carrying them to the build site in his shirt pocket. In Weakley County, Tennessee, a 34-year-old warehouse loader named Curtis Webb built and sold 2 Quonset cabins to other men in his county for $600 each because he understood something that large programs consistently miss. Men who cannot afford to wait 3 years for a permit approval need a roof available this week, and he was not alone in figuring that out. The knowledge travels the way survival knowledge has always traveled in rural American communities, through food bank lines in small towns where a man sketches a foundation layout on the back of a paper plate, through church parking lots on Saturday mornings where one man tells another that he knows somebody who built a home from a military arch for less than $500, through the waiting rooms of free clinics where a stranger overhears 2 sentences of conversation and writes a name down on his phone, through comment threads on YouTube videos where someone posts a photograph of a finished interior at 11 at night, and by morning the thread is full of questions about permit thresholds and where to source damaged panels along the Gulf Coast. A man in rural Mississippi told a county outreach worker he learned the full insulation and moisture control method from a conversation at a free health clinic in Hattiesburg. The man who taught him had learned it from someone else at a meal service in Jackson. Nobody sat in a classroom. Nobody paid for the instruction. One detail specific to the finished mini Quonset cabin, distinct from a bare surplus hut, is what cedar trim and glass doors do to how neighbors and officials see the structure. A corrugated steel arch with a bare plywood end wall reads as a storage shed. The same arch with cedar frame glass doors and a wooden deck reads as a cabin. That distinction is not aesthetic. It determines whether a structure generates 0 complaints or a code enforcement notice within the first week. Here is what the numbers say when you place them side by side. $487. Total build cost. 1 man, 1 cabin. Still standing in Anderson County, Tennessee, more than 2 years after the last bolt was tightened. $531,000. Average cost per unit of permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles. 1 unit. In a city where 75,000 people were still sleeping outside the night those permits were being processed. That gap is not a matter of quality or permanence. It is a matter of what becomes possible when the people closest to a problem stop waiting for the system to arrive and start reaching for the nearest socket wrench. 0 complaints is not a marketing phrase. It is the outcome of a structure that works thermally, works legally, and works socially, because it was built by someone who researched the permit threshold before buying the first bolt, negotiated the land before ordering the arch panels, and understood that cedar trim and glass doors change the conversation with every neighbor and official who drives past. For years later, the insulation holds, the vapor barrier holds, the solar system runs, the door locks from the inside. Whitfield put it plainly when a neighbor asked him why he had done it this way instead of waiting for something more conventional to come through. He said he was not going to wait. He said the apartment was gone, the shelter wait list was 11 weeks long, and he had a dog he was not giving up. He said he had a socket wrench and a library card, and those turned out to be enough. That is not a remarkable sentence. It is a precise one. And the men in Arkansas and Texas and rural Tennessee who had built the same structure for the same reasons would say something close to it, because they arrived at the same answer through the same arithmetic. The system told them what was required. The surplus yard and the vapor barrier and the handshake with a retired mail carrier told them what was actually true. Whitfield stood at the door of the finished cabin in the late afternoon light, corrugated steel at his back, cedar trim framing the glass. The Labrador was on the deck. The field ran out behind Pruitt's property line into the kind of quiet that does not cost anything. It was just an evening. He was home. If resourcefulness like this matters to you, subscribing helps more people find this video. The video on screen right now covers a completely different off-grid build with methods every bit as practical as these. Click it and keep going.